I'm sitting in a very special room. This is the boardroom of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the global nuclear watchdog in Vienna, Austria. And I have with me Tariq Rauf. He was the head of the verification system for the International Atomic Energy Agency, a Pakistani born Canadian, tremendous experience on non proliferation. And today we are speaking about whether South Asia is one of the most dangerous places where two countries share a border and both have nuclear weapons. Tariq, what has your experience been, and do you concur with the view that South Asia today is one of the most dangerous places because both countries keep sabre rattling and both have nuclear weapons, which they talk about every now and then?
Well, I do not share that view. I think this is a common misperception in the West of regarding South Asia as a very dangerous nuclear flashpoint. A number of studies have been done that if India and Pakistan used 100 nuclear weapons, there would be global winter. This is all nonsense. While there is a lot of saber rattling, as you said, and there are border skirmishes over the line of control in Kashmir, I think both sides know what the consequences of a nuclear exchange would be, and I do not fall asleep worrying about a nuclear conflagration in South Asia. I'm actually more worried about the increasing nuclear tensions and dangers between the United States, NATO, and the Russian Federation. Weapons that are on high alert. No weapons in India and Pakistan are on high alert, ready to go. There are nearly 2,000 nuclear warheads between the Russian Federation and the United States that are ready to go at a moment's notice. And given the fact that the political tensions between East and West are now again at a high, we have a new Cold War. You have American submarines probing Russian ports near Murmansk, bombers of both sides flying near each other's borders. Those are the flashpoints, not South Asia.
Let's talk a little bit more about South Asia, then come back, because largely it's an Indian journalist talking to a person of Pakistani origin, even though you were born in India. Why do you think the world has this perception that the both countries would have a nuclear flashpoint sooner than later?
Well, that the three countries have, in fact, as you know, fought wars over Kashmir 3 times in the past decades. They have never fully accepted that two countries of South Asia could master sophisticated nuclear technology. So there is a subtle element of racism in there. That these people, have got this technology. And we should recognize that this is 70-year-old technology. This is not the latest technology. So while India and Pakistan do have nuclear weapons, it's not something to be that proud of. I think India should be more proud of the space assets that they have, the satellites that they have launched, rather than having nuclear weapons or missiles that can carry them. So it's the convenient misnomer. It's the convenient way of shifting attention. Between the Russians and the Americans, they have 14,000 or nearly 14,000 nuclear warheads. Between India and Pakistan, there may be 500-600. So we need to keep a scale here. Between the Russians and the Americans, we have several million kilograms of plutonium and highly enriched uranium that could be used for nuclear weapons. That is not the case of South Asia. So again, we need to be careful, and I'm sorry to say that some South Asia analysts in the US and in the West of Indian and Pakistani origin are flaming this type of narrative because that's what some of their cohorts want to hear, that if they hear it from an Indian or a Pakistani researcher in the US, Canada, or the UK, it gives it even more credibility.
It was in this same boardroom where the India-specific safeguards agreement for the IAEA was discussed. But that is now history. India has some reactors under safeguards, some out of safeguards. But there is one point which India has been wanting and India has been seeking, which is the membership of the nuclear suppliers group. Do you think India is a worthy member and worthy of getting a place on the high table on the NSG?
Well, for the record, I was opposed to the U.S. giving this nuclear cooperation agreement to India in 2005. and also opposed to the so-called India-specific exemption by the Nuclear Suppliers Group. In fact, I was responsible here in the agency when the Safeguards Agreement for India and the additional protocol were negotiated. However, that is now history, as you say. I think it's also very ironic that the Nuclear Suppliers Group was established as a result or a response to the May 1974 explosion.
Correct.
And so it's even more ironic that both Pakistan and India that have suffered at the hands of the Nuclear Suppliers Group by denial of civil nuclear technology for decades now are literally begging to become members of this very organization. I'm not opposed to India and Pakistan getting membership together, but I think both countries should be asked to sign up and ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty as a precondition, because when you and I want to join a club, you have to pay a membership fee. So, but I have tried very hard with many important members of the NSG to make this a condition. But sadly, most of these countries are looking at 300, 400 million middle class consumers in India, and they are more concerned about their commercial activities in India rather than non-proliferation. So I don't see much pressure coming on India to sign up to this comprehensive.
The CTBT signature is not going to happen. The Americans are not going to sign it, ratify it. The Chinese are not going to do it. If they don't do it, India doesn't do it. If India doesn't do it, Pakistan doesn't do it. I think it's a vicious game out there.
Well, China and the U.S. have in fact signed it.
Yeah, not ratified.
Yeah, China has not ratified. The U.S. Senate unfortunately rejected ratification in 1999. But as signatories, these countries are obligated under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties not to do anything to undermine the treaty. And since India is not going to test, if India were to carry out a nuclear test, I think all the goodwill towards India would evaporate. So if India will not test, Pakistan will not test. So I believe that there is no downside to India and Pakistan signing up to the CTBT. They do not lose anything. It's one way of demonstrating good citizenship. And I think it would make their life easier in getting a criteria-based approach to become partners, participating governments in the Nuclear Suppliers Group. It should also be mentioned for the record that the Nuclear Suppliers Group does not have international legitimacy.
Yes.
These are 48 self-appointed countries. The NSG has never been recognized as a credible export control organization in the context of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference or the Security Council. So again, while it does include pretty much everyone that has capacity for exporting nuclear items, it does not still have a status of a multilaterally negotiated entity. So I think both New Delhi and Islamabad need to be careful and not give the NSG more importance than it deserves. India already has access to uranium from Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia. It gets its power reactors from Russia. So for India, I think membership in the NSG is more a matter of pride and status.
Also of reverse flow, meaning technology being developed in India and flowing outside India and in the nuclear sector.
Well, there's nothing preventing India from exporting nuclear technology. NSG members are not barred from buying from India or Pakistan.
So you think India could, even at this stage, export full 220 megawatt pressurized heavy water reactors to other countries?
They could export to any country that's willing to buy. The NSG does not prevent buying from India. What NSG does is prevent selling to India, which is why they had to accept the exception. But selling, there's no, if a country is willing to accept the NSG criteria for the transfer of technology from India and whatever conditions India would want to impose, that its exported technology should be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, there is no bar from the NSG preventing that. So both for India and Pakistan, membership is A for status and prestige, that they are now recognized de facto as nuclear armed countries, and they are part of the community of countries mastering nuclear technology. And most importantly, it makes nuclear technology and material available to them from countries other than Russia and China, because both India and Pakistan only have one principal supplier, Russia for India and China for Pakistan.
India wanted also to import reactors from America and from France. The negotiations still go on. The both countries, the companies which were trying to export went bankrupt. That probably went in India's favor, but they still hope to have something. On the energy front, there's a lot of talk whether alone India should be admitted and Pakistan should not be admitted. What is your view on that?
Well, most people are concerned that since the NSG operates on the basis of consensus, if India were to be admitted alone, the Pakistanis and their supporters believe that India would then prevent Pakistani membership. And therefore, Pakistan has been promoting that there should be objective criteria, and countries that fulfill those criteria could be given membership, such as separation between the civil and military fuel cycles. All civil nuclear facilities in Pakistan already are under safeguards, have always been under safeguards. In India, despite the separation plan, it's not entirely clear. And that they have signed up to international non-proliferation obligations, which is why I mentioned the CTBT. And I don't see any reason why India and Pakistan need to be viscerally opposed to the CTBT. This is old think. And finally, if India and Pakistan both were to come in at the same time, I think it might help in their bilateral relationship as well. However, there are some countries in the Western members of the NSG that do not support a criteria-based approach because they argue that a potential member might meet the criteria, but they still would not want to give it nuclear cooperation, and this primarily applies to Pakistan, which is why the Pakistanis have relied on China, Turkey, and a few other supporters in the NSG to push for, or to have both, not so much to block India, but to have both come in at the same time.
Also on this issue of the nuclear weapons, any message for Prime Minister Modi, who is very, very strongly against any talks with Pakistan as long as terror is emanating from the soil of Pakistan, which is what he says. But at the same time, there is so much sabre rattling, taking nuclear weapons, bringing into the picture. Any message for Prime Minister Modi? Separately, I'll ask you with Prime Minister Imran Khan also.
Well, there is increasing worry that under Prime Minister Modi, India is losing the secular nature that was foreseen by its founders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru to have a society based on multiple faiths. And now with this Hindutva ideology, so to speak, and the primacy of Hindu ideology, and there are reports that there may be some sort of persecution of minorities and Muslims and so on. I think it would behoove Prime Minister Modi in this day and age, where we are well into the 21st century, to live up to the ideals of the founders of India, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, who were moderates. And India having a population of more than 1 billion people, having a functioning democracy where millions of people successfully go and vote, and governments leave office once they've lost the vote, which doesn't happen in some countries. I think there is a greater responsibility on Prime Minister Modi to show that India can be a beacon to the rest of the world, to have a multi-ethnic society which is multilingual and that functions on the principles of secularism and respecting the rights of all and not just majoritarianism. And finally, on the nuclear front, I think to dial down the rhetoric on either a military solution or resort to nuclear weapons should there be another crisis between the two countries.
Any message for Prime Minister Imran Khan? Because he came in talking of trying to make India and Pakistan better friends, but somewhere along the line it hasn't worked for various reasons. Any message for him? One, on his style of governance, two, on the nuclear and atomic issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, my message to Prime Minister Imran Khan also would be to promote greater secularism in Pakistan, because again, some of the more radical Islamist parties have been coming out into the streets and pushing for a version of an Islamic society, which is their version, which doesn't exist. And again, Muhammad Ali Jinnah's vision of Pakistan was, where all people of Pakistan would live together in peace and harmony, regardless of their faith. Also, I think Prime Minister Imran Khan finally is attacking the endemic corruption in the country, primarily by the two established parties, which have each ruled the country for 2 or 3 terms. And there is a lot of impatience now as those who are in the crosshairs of being investigated for corruption are pushing back. And recently, India and Pakistan have a vast variety of confidence building measures, which for the most part are still working. They still exchange lists of nuclear facilities and so on. And I think those could be strengthened. And I think there could be a dialogue, a military to military dialogue, starting on the nuclear issue and other issues, then to be followed up by a political dialogue, because the military dialogue could be more technical and could pave the way for a broader dialogue between the two prime ministers. And I would suggest that perhaps they find a way of meeting somewhere, either through the SARC auspices or through the Shanghai Cooperation Forum or some forum where both countries are present and meet on the sidelines to move on. And finally, I think I should have a message for the media as well in both countries. I think after the events in February, the media got really worked up, became very nationalistic, and I think started to create the conditions where the decision space and freedom for the political leaders was being reduced by coming up with really extremist.
You're talking of the surgical strikes and the Balakote airstrikes, which India undertook.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think there's anything like a surgical strike. This is a thing invented by the Americans. Strike is a strike. I mean, this is not a surgeon in an operating room wielding a scalpel with a laser or something. Anyway, yes, that's what I'm referring to. And now with social media, everyone who has a smart device, can access through YouTube, WhatsApp, or all these applications. And unfortunately, it's the more radical and more extreme voices that find a way of getting more airtime than they normally discover. So I'm very glad that there are responsible journalists like you.
Thank you.
Who are continuing to do this work at a sober level and to keep rationality up front.
So in the beginning, you mentioned that you don't believe that India and Pakistan would be the nuclear flashpoint. Briefly, where do you think is the flashpoint? You mentioned the West, both America and Russia and NATO. Briefly tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. So both in the Russian Federation and the United States, you have land-based ICBMs that are fully armed, are ready to be launched at short notice. There can be false alarms. As both countries are relying more heavily on computers and IT, you can have hacking or spoofing. An attack could be launched, made to look like an attack from the other side. And given the fact that President Putin and President Trump have maybe 20, 25 minutes within which to make a decision about whether or not the other country is attacking them, and if the satellites and other warning systems, which are all dependent on the internet, on other types of communications technologies, if those are jammed or interrupted, it can create a very dangerous situation. Fortunately, in both India and Pakistan, they keep their nuclear weapons, it's called demated, and also not in assembled form, whereas in both Russia and the United States, these nuclear weapons are assembled. They are sitting on land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles ready to go. There are bombers that can be put in the air at short notice. You have nearly 200 American nuclear weapons sitting in Europe, which could be delivered, with the U.S. moving on building ballistic missile defenses in Poland and in Romania. The Russians believe is threatening their nuclear arsenal. So the Russians have a new doctrine of early use of small nuclear weapons to terminate a conflict. The United States also put out a nuclear doctrine on the use of low-yield nuclear weapons to restore strategic stability. So both Russia and the United States are talking about low-yield nuclear weapons. They are talking about early use of nuclear weapons, which is very dangerous because they have ready assembled weapons. They have military capabilities ready to go. In India and Pakistan, that is not the case, so we should not exaggerate the situation. And by putting the focus on India and Pakistan, we are actually deflecting our focus from the real concern, which is between the two large nuclear weapon states.
So that was Tariq telling you, He doesn't believe that India and Pakistan would be the nuclear flashpoint. It is the old rivals, America and Russia, which could be the nuclear flashpoint. So, a heartening thought for the South Asians, the 1.5 billion South Asians. In Vienna, at the International Atomic Energy Agency, Pallava Bagla.